Welcome to this explainer. Okay, so today we're diving into the wildly fascinating and, let's be honest, pretty alarming journey of ocean pollution. We're going to trace the exact path of our everyday waste, starting right beneath our feet on land, traveling all the way out to the center of the ocean, and eventually making its way right back onto our dinner plates. It's this massive interconnected system, and understanding it is absolutely crucial for grasping one of the biggest environmental puzzles of our time.
Now, let's kick things off with a pretty famous myth. You've definitely heard of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, right? A lot of us picture this massive, solid island of trash, something so incredibly dense you could literally dock a boat and take a walk on it. You see headlines claiming it's twice the size of Texas. But if you actually took a boat out there today, is that what you'd really see?
Well, the reality is actually much more insidious. The myth is that it's this giant, solid island you can spot from a satellite. But the truth? It's a widely dispersed area of suspended, microscopic plastic particles. It has a super low density, only about 4 particles per cubic meter, so there's no way you can see it from space. In fact, casual boaters passing right through the middle of it usually don't even realize it's there.
There's this brilliant quote from a researcher who was out studying the South Pacific, and they hit the nail on the head. They pointed out that this cloud of microplastics extends vertically and horizontally. We really need to reframe how we picture this whole thing. Instead of a floating landfill, we need to think of ocean pollution as a toxic underwater smog.
Section 1. The source, from land to sea. So to figure out where this oceanic smog actually comes from, we have to look far inland. The big culprit here is a concept called non-point source pollution. Usually, when we think of pollution, we picture a factory pipe just dumping sludge into a river, right? That's point source pollution. But the vast majority of oceanic pollutants come from everyday diffuse runoff. Stuff from our streets, our cars, farms, and even our own backyards.
Let's track this journey. Step 1. Rain washes our carelessly discarded items, tire fragments and fertilizers, straight into local streams and storm drains. Step 2. Those local streams feed into massive river systems, which basically act as high-speed transit networks. And finally, step 3, those rivers funnel all of that accumulated debris right into the sea.
And here's a truly staggering statistic for you. Just 10 major rivers globally, including the Yangtze, the Nile, and the Niger, are responsible for a massive 90% of all the plastic reaching our oceans. 90%! These immense waterways are literally superhighways for global debris.
Section 2. The ocean's conveyor belt, trapping the debris.
Okay, so once all that land-based runoff hits the open water, why doesn't it just wash right back up on the nearest beach? Well, the ocean operates a bit like a giant conveyor belt, using what are called gyres. Gyres are these massive, rotating ocean currents. Think of them as giant, slow-moving whirlpools. Because the currents are weakest right in the middle, they act like a trap, pulling in debris from all over the world and holding it right there in a centralized spot. Globally, there are 5 major oceanic gyres. And unfortunately, researchers have found that all 5 contain significant garbage patches at their centers. You've got the famous North Pacific one, of course, but there's also the South Pacific, the North Atlantic, the South Atlantic, and the Indian Ocean. The trash distribution perfectly mirrors these ocean currents. To really put the scale of this into perspective, the United Nations estimated a jaw-dropping number. There are about 46,000 pieces of plastic for every single square mile of ocean. It is just this vast, invisible soup of human-made trash. Section 3. The microplastic transformation, breaking down, not going away. Now, what actually happens to a piece of plastic trapped out there in those sun-drenched currents for decades? Unlike an apple core that naturally biodegrades into organic matter, plastic photodegrades. The sunlight essentially bakes it, breaking it down into smaller and smaller pieces. But here's the catch. It never changes chemically. It stays a synthetic polymer, releasing toxic chemicals like BPA and PCBs into the water as it fractures. This process creates microplastics, tiny fragments less than 5 millimeters wide, often smaller than a grain of rice. And because they're so small and light, they don't just float on the surface. They can be suspended up to 30 meters or about 100 feet down into the water column. That is exactly why we called it a 3-dimensional smog earlier. It's an entire layer of the ocean just permeated with microscopic plastic dust. Section 4.
toxins in the food web, the biological trap. This brings us to the most alarming part of our journey, how this microscopic smog re-enters the living ecosystem. As plastics decompose in the water, they release that chemical sludge we just mentioned, which leads to bioaccumulation. Basically, that's the gradual buildup of these toxic chemicals and heavy metals inside a living marine organism over time, happening faster than the animal can get rid of them. If you want to really grasp the biological risk here, consider this staggering fact. In the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, there are approximately 6 pounds of plastic for every 1 pound of plankton. Plankton is the absolute foundation of the marine food web. So when filter feeders are sweeping the water for a meal, they are vastly outnumbered by plastic particles.
Let's follow this right up the food chain through what's called trophic transfer. First, tiny filter feeders mistake these microplastics for food. Second, small fish come along and eat those filter feeders. Third, larger marine predators eat the small fish, concentrating the toxins even further. And fourth, well, humans consume the seafood. Because these microplastics are just millimeters wide, they easily infiltrate the tissues of the animals we harvest. Popular seafoods, especially filter feeders like oysters and clams, alongside various fish, become direct vehicles for these toxins to enter the human body. People who eat seafood are actively ingesting a portion of the microplastics that were originally swallowed by marine life. Which leaves us with a pretty provocative thought to ponder. We started this explainer looking at non-point source pollution, runoff from our streets and farms. We watched it travel down rivers, get trapped in oceanic gyres, turn into a toxic smog, and climb its way right back up the food chain to us. So we have to ask ourselves, when we carelessly toss away plastic on land, are we ultimately just seasoning our own seafood? Definitely something to chew on next time you see a piece of litter on the street. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep your curiosity sharp.